Hello and welcome to this FlightGlobal feature interview with Emirates Airline President Sir Tim Clark. Sir Tim has been at the helm since 2003, having been one of the airline's founding fathers back in 1985. He has helped shape not only the airline's incredible expansion and network development, but also been at the forefront of the design and introduction of major aircraft programs like the 777-300ER and the A380. He is now stepping aside as the airline begins an executive team transition unveiled late last year, but will continue to support the management team over the coming months. So I'm delighted that Sir Tim has joined me to reflect on the amazing journey that Dubai and Emirates have been on, starting way back at the beginning when the airline was established in 1985. Before Emirates was created, you were working at Gulf Air, I'm right?
Yeah.
Presumably in Bahrain.
I was indeed.
And obviously I think we've talked about this in the past many times, you looked at what was a great network player, Gulf Air, with its 4 hubs. That's probably the one problem it had, I don't know, maybe. And you saw the opportunity, you saw the geographic value of its location, certainly as aircraft performance improved. It already had improved because I think that the tech stops that you used to get through Bahrain started changing with the 747-400 when that was being launched. So I just wondered whether you were looking for that opportunity and the Emirates in Dubai opportunity appeared, or whether how it all came about with your involvement.
Well, actually, the truth be known, when I was in Gulf Air, and we were a very successful operation, we were the sole carrier in the Middle East at a time when the oil was going through the roof, and the early 70s through to the mid 80s were just a gold mine for anybody in the air travel business down that part of the world. Dubai was very anxious to keep its open skies, and Gulf Air was becoming particularly bullyish in their approach to Dubai because they saw it as a bolt hole for all the carriers who wanted to come to the Middle East, who didn't have to comply with the aeropolitical requirements of Gulf Air and its own estates. And so it was a bolt hole. And so whenever Gulf Air had an aeropolitical issue, in the case of the from 1983 onwards, it was with the Pakistanis and access to the North Pakistan points. They got all the owner states involved in the restriction of Pakistani pilot airlines to those states, except Dubai, where the former ruler, Sheikh Rashid, had said, no, these skies are always open and we need to be. And of course, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, now the ruler, was absolutely adamant that there was nobody going to tell Dubai what they could and couldn't do with their aviation policy. So I was on the other side of this, watching it in the management of Gulf Air, watching the decisions that were taken, thinking at the time, well, I hope they know what they're doing, as they removed all the flights from Dubai in 1983-84. They used to have about 400 plus a week, but they took it down to about 20 or 30 and starved them of capacity. What they didn't realize that they were dealing with Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, now the ruler. And I think and that's how it started. He then decided that the only way to deal with this and give Dubai what he wanted was to have his own airline. I don't think it was on the scale that we have today, what he was thinking, but at least he said, I will no longer be answerable to or rely on other people telling me what I can and can't do with regards to Dubai. And I watched this until right the way through 1984, through the early part of 85. And there were a lot of fairly ugly incidents. And the response of the Gulf Air management to those incidents, which were invariably, what can I say, childlike. And then, of course, by the time the ruler had taken his decision to open the airline, he had the Gulf Air people, and I was still in Gulf Air until April 1985, when the realization that they might have created something that they may not be able to deal with, i.e. competition, because they'd never had competition. There was no competition. Gulf Air had a total monopoly of everything in the Middle East. And because it you know, people like me were working on product and all the other bits and pieces. They had a fantastic product on the TriStars, a lot of which you see the fingerprints of Gulf Air in Emirates today. Okay, so they were able to outperform Royal Jordanian, Air India, Kuwait Airways, Saudia, all the airlines that are still in existence today. So they were doing very well. And I remember seeing the bottom line of the cash coming into the company, the way it was compared to what it was when I first went there in '75. And I think they realized that they'd unleashed something. So there was rapid backpedaling to try and salvage the situation, but all to no avail because the ruler here today was having none of it. Don't forget, he wasn't the ruler then, he was the Minister of Defense. And he had made up his mind and there was nothing, sorry? Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, yeah. And there was nothing that was going to change his mind, clearly. And I just came along when Maurice Flanagan, he was asked by Sheikh Mohammed. Sheikh Mohammed approached a number of people in the town to see who was best suited to set up an airline. Obviously, the aviation experience rested in Donata, and Maurice being an old stalwart in the business, it was to him that this was assigned. And he then got a team of 10 or 12 of us from, some were already here, others were brought in like me, and off we went. And that was they'd already been doing work before I arrived, just trying to test the feasibility of it. I looked at that work when I came in, I thought, this is going to be tough, very tough. Because of the stranglehold that Gulf Air had on the aeropolitics of the region, the very strict predeterminist thinking in aeropolitical thought in the 70s and 80s, which came from post-war. So, you know, the bilateral arrangement, one flight, one city, etc. Anyway, the man was determined. So we set the airline up. October the 25th, it started flying with 2 of these leased PIA aircraft, 737-300 and an old B4 in the colors of Emirates. But the small group that was charged with trying to make it work, fortunately, were pretty long in the tooth. 1, about the aviation business as it stood then. 2, about the aviation business in the Middle East. People like Peter Hill, Keith Longstaff, Peter Sharman, we all came from Gulf Air and we knew how not to do it. We knew the pitfalls. So that team were basically the people who set this company up, plus dear old Don Foster, who died a month ago, who set up the in-flight services side of things. And, but, you know, I remember sitting back and thinking, you know, well, we could become a Gulf Air if we wanted to, but that's going to be very difficult. As you probably know, between the start of our operation in October 1985 to the end of the first Gulf War in the summer of '91, we were not allowed to fly to any of the Gulf Air states, including Abu Dhabi. And so faced with that, and also I had been very close to the way Gulf Air went about its business in aeropolitical, commercial, operational side of things. I knew how they thought. I knew what they would be thinking of us. So to a large extent, personally, I could outmaneuver the way they were going with regard to the way they dealt with Emirates, which was a difficult one for them because they just didn't know what to do. But we then decided to take some fairly bold moves. And I said to the guys here, Maurice, Sheikh Ahmed then, because he had been the chairman, that if we were going to make a go of this, let's go for it. Let's really go for it. And I explained to them that, in my humble opinion, that very difficult one for them to really accept and recognize that if you look at the geography, all those bits and pieces, say, look where Dubai is, look at the landmass, look at the population centers, look at the powers of economics. This is well before Asia took off, of course. Look what we could reach with what we have, not that we're particularly good, so let's go for it. Let's start London, let's start Paris, let's start Rome and Indonesia or Hong Kong. Forget the Middle East, because they're not going to let us in. So if we're not going to be let in, what are we going to do? And I said, honestly, if we do it right, and I remember how well the Gulf Air product was perceived and accepted and enjoyed. If we do that right, and we use the latest aircraft that are available to us and start the basis of a hub. Now, the hub to them was kind of a bit of a strange one because they'd seen Gulf Air with Muscat, Bahrain, Doha, and Abu Dhabi all having to share the hub out. So it was, I said, well, the notion that you would have a centralized hub, ignoring the Middle East, but serving an intercontinental operation was quite a difficult one for them to do because our airport wasn't designed for a hub, etc. So anyway, cut a long story short, that's how we started. And those 310-300s on London, Gatwick, in July 1987. And from there, we opened Frankfurt a month later. And so it went on. We just carried on opening. And the more we did, the more we got. Because we punched above our weight, not only in what we did with regard to the fleet, but the way we presented ourselves to the markets. Morris had a very good eye for the power of brand and the PR side of things. And he deployed the various agencies that we had before we set up our own to really do, just as I said, punch above our weight in those markets, particularly using in those days, pre-online, we had to use print media, we had to do TV, radio, etc. But we spent an awful lot of money. And the result of that was by 1990, 1991, when we had a grand total of 20 aircraft, people began to think that we had 200 because we were putting ourselves around so much. We came across eventually to be described as the designer airline. Because we were young, we were relatively hip in the terms of the late 80s, early 90s. We attuned ourselves to what clients really wanted, although things were changing at a pace. And so suddenly we became, can I say, kind of the darling of the international world. And we challenged, of course, the KLMs, the Air Frances, the BOA, British Airways, and then challenged a very aeropolitical structure that hadn't moved since 1945. You remember I was saying Africa to the Middle East over Europe, always. You had to go from Cote d'Ivoire to Paris to get to Dubai. Equally, if you wanted to go to other places in Asia, from continent Africa, the Middle East, you had to go north before you went east, although there were some flights coming through Dubai, but they invariably terminated in India. Like the British Airways flight used to come in London, Kuwait, Dubai, Delhi. That was it. There was no, except for dear old BCAP. And look what happened to that by 1988. That had gone into British Airways. So the notion that, one, there was demand for travel to the east, two, that there was a sixth freedom possibility into multiple points. Because what I was looking at, I said, listen guys, all these things that they concentrate on the Hong Kongs, on the Singapores, on the Sydneys, let them get on with it. We'll just go for all these other places, which are equally aspirational, equally demanding. And I can assure you, if we do that, we will still go to those places, but we'll go to all the other places as well. So, that's when in the UK we looked at, of course, Manchester, Heathrow, of course, in 91 we got into there. Then we opened Stuttgart and Hamburg and Munich, and so on it goes on. So we were always going round the primary hubs because we knew where the markets were and where they were actually flowing into their hubs and on. And what we invariably found that the capacity into the Asian markets, the South American markets, or the African markets offered by the European carriers, given this strange aeropolitical flow, was one, the capacity was far, far below what it should have been. The prices were extraordinarily high. And therein lay the opportunity, because we could start connecting once we saw what we were doing. China, Middle East, India, UK, multiple points in India, multiple points in UK and Europe, everywhere else. Philippines into Rome, huge Catholic population, and so on and so forth. We looked at the segments, we wanted to travel, why they travel, when they travel, And so we just carried on moving. We just put more and more and more. And of course, suddenly, in 1995, the age of information is born. The internet hits us all. And that puts us into a time warp, you know, accelerating at such a pace that we were almost unable to keep up with the demand. Fortunately for us, profits were rocketing, cash was building. People kept on accusing us, as they still do, about receiving large amounts of money from our shareholder, etc. But the fact of the matter is, what we did so well. It was hugely cash positive. And the more we did of that, notwithstanding movements of currencies, and we've had all the usual traumas that everybody faced, 1998, the meltdown of the Asian economies, George Soros, the Gulf War I, you work through we've done all that. We were able to navigate through all those because despite all of it, demand was continuing to grow because we offered a unique product. The notion that you could get from Nairobi to Shanghai with one stop in some luxury at a very affordable price, well, Gulf War or no Gulf War, that wasn't going to stop because they'd never done it before. And when you unleashed that connectivity, so business started to grow big time. And what we saw, wherever we went in Africa, for instance, businesses started to flourish on the basis of the connectivity we offered, not just for the human cargo, but for the air cargo, which of course was also growing exponentially because of the world of just-in-time. So whether it be automotive parts coming out of China into Stuttgart for Mercedes, we were there for them. So the way businesses started to orientate to the immediacy, dealing with the demand and the immediacy of that demand for any single product, whether it be pharmaceuticals or, as I said, auto parts or whatever it may be. So air cargo started to move at the pace. And again, what then happened with dear old Ram Menon, who was our cargo supremo then, he gets the bee in his bonnet about all of this and gets going. He really gets going. So he creates a super cargo hub here. At the time when we were developing, and we were very, very strong on cargo, because at that point, it used to give us 20% of our income. So we were forever beating out the manufacturers, saying, I remember going to Airbus and saying, you put that seventh pallet in the A380. No, we can't fit it in. I said, well, move the E in eBay. Do something with it. You've got to have a seventh pallet. And you know they did that. They did it because we were lining up to order quite a few. But cargo was so important to us that, and Ram was given his head with regard to developing the cargo product. And I honestly believe that people like him were able to galvanize cargo into, you had the FedExes and the DHLs and the UPSs, all with their cargo, their packaging business. It's still in its infancy, don't forget. You're talking about the mid-90s. I say not in their infancy, but compared to the scale of what they are doing today. And Ram was very plugged into all these people. He knew them all. So he was able to see how they did it, how they were able to ship things just in time, which is what courier business is all about today. And I say packaging business is all about. So that took off. So the sort of this symphony of cargo, passenger, brand, etc. It all started to work in a manner, sometimes you can be really unlucky because you get bad people making the wrong decisions. So your brand goes and does something else, you don't portray it as it is, but somehow we had good people who knew how to bring this all together. That team of people was still there. They started to disappear by the mid-late 90s, but I think I'm the last one here. But we managed to, and one thing we did do, Max, we were absolutely focused, uncompromising, merciless. We would not let anything get in our way. We had everybody and their dog telling us we were doing the wrong thing. Give it to other carriers. They know what they're doing. Really, you just don't have any idea. And then 5 years later, they're saying, do you think you could help us do a few things? So the boot was on the other foot, and it's been like that ever since. But circling back to the cash side of things, so by the late 90s, early part of the noughties, we started to raise a few eyebrows, of course, as you would, and we continued the pace. I think the biggest single thing we did at the beginning of 2000 was to order the 380 in July 2000 in Farnborough, one day before the Concorde crashed in Paris. I think when we did that and ordered 15 of them, and nobody else really did it except for Air France and latterly Lufthansa, then people began to think, no, we've got something here. This is something we really need to take a bit more seriously. But by then it was far too late. We were 15 years into the growth of the business. The business was excelling, it was expanding. We threw more and more and more at product. We designed our own product, both in terms of interiors, what we did with the service, etc. And we were constantly refreshing and renewing and realizing that in terms of brand and aspirations to that brand and wanting to travel, that more and more people were coming to us. And when that 380 eventually came into us in 2008, and we started flying that thing, well, the world took off for us. And another sort of 4-step up the staircase, if you can call it that. So there was that. So we had the 777, the 330. We then had the 340-500, which was the first time I remember I said, I cannot let a new aircraft like this follow the traditional interiors of airlines, because we were going to fly them for 14 or 15 hours. So we really had to do something different. Sat down and drew out what I thought would be the suite. And so it goes on in first class. And by that time, BA had introduced, not only they'd introduced the flatbed in first, you know, the original Cocoon. So I said, we've got to do better than this. And that's where the suite came in, with the doors and all the other bits and pieces, all the gizmos and gadgets, the TVs, etc. Because we really wanted to raise the bar, not just a little bit. We wanted to put it into orbit so that everybody would have great difficulty of catching up. And of course,
just a couple of points from when you talked earlier about the creation of Emirates. A couple of key things you mentioned was the brand, and obviously that let's just go for it. Those two key moments, I think, the creation of the brand. I remember the launch of the airline, particularly remember it coming into Gatwick. I remember the name Emirates. I thought the livery was beautiful. It was just so crisp and simple, but it said exactly what it needed to say. It said, you know, it's the Emirates carrier, and you know, it was quite sophisticated, albeit quite simple in terms of its design. So, who did you have an agency do that? Was that your?
Yes. Let me tell you how that happened. The agency that appointed was an outfit called Negus and Negus. He's invited down by Morris, and he's told the brief, and he said, we haven't even got a name for it. So he sits in Morris's house, in one of the bedrooms, and he starts work. And he not only came up with the livery, which of course includes the broad sweep of the flag, but the name as well, which of course resonated immediately with the ownership. So it was you remember what I was saying earlier about how Morris viewed the criticality of what we're doing in terms of how it was going to be presented to the markets. He didn't at that stage, because I hadn't actually joined by then, thought about a massive international presence, but Negus and Negus came up with that. That pleased the boss, Sheikh Mohammed, and the colours, etc. So he designed it. And frankly, the only thing I did was change the lettering to bodyline, okay, and introduce a suite fly, which we did in-house actually with our own in-house designers, who, by the way, are still here. They did the Sri Lankan one when we took Sri Lanka. That was all done in-house by our guys. But Negus and Negus, what was Dick Negus? He was the original guy that came up with the logo and set Morris on that path.
And then the other thing was when you said let's go for it. You know, basically let's just go international. We can't do anything around the region. We're being closed out. I would say that's probably one of those key moments for the airline, which of course ended up becoming the cornerstone or the foundation stone of what its business is today, which is connecting people from east to west over the like properly east and west, like Europe and Asia, Africa, over one hub.
We got involved in 1990 with the 777. By that time, Boeing had already, this was the golden era as far as I'm concerned. They came up with that wonderful machine, and we got involved in that. We didn't actually have, precipitate its design. What we did do was in the late 80s, we were talking about ultra long range aircraft, always talking about, well, wouldn't it be nice to fly to Los Angeles non-stop, Sydney non-stop, all the other bits and pieces. And our input to that was probably the 777-200X, which was the forerunner of the LR. And that was then brought into competition against the 340-500, which we'd already bought. But Boeing then came along and said, oh, well, we've got 102,000 pound thrust ISO, sea level thrust. And we said, well, it's not enough to do what we needed to do. If you're going to match the 38-ton payload of the 340-500. So there was that. And obviously from there, and I think, Max, one of the biggest thing was for us, was that they knew we meant business, okay? They knew that what we were up to by then. They got closest to us. We had very good relationships with people in Toulouse and latterly in Seattle. And they knew that we weren't messing around, time wasters. And that they knew that if we did what we asked them to do, we would buy the aeroplane, which is what we did. So we always said, if you let us get involved in this and do what we wanted, we will buy this aeroplane. So when we bought the 777 and the 380, okay, just to give you two examples, they realized that this lot were really serious because, well, in those days, they thought, oh, well, of course, it's all Dubai money, they've got lots of money, etc. It didn't. It was still on that, not saying a shoestring, but it was as we built our credibility. And the more we got involved with the manufacturers, and the more they took us seriously by virtue of what we were bringing to them in terms of design and in credibility with regard to orders. So the banking community, so hooked into the OEMs, suddenly began to take us a lot more seriously, and realizing that we were generating cash sufficient enough to take on quite a lot of debt, service that debt on a business model that was already starting to be, was startlingly good. So by the mid-90s, late 90s, we were ripping ahead. So then, of course, they come out with I remember seeing the 777-300, the air show, in Cathay Pacific colours. And I got on board it and I looked at this and said, I think it was with Shake Up and maybe even Morris at the time. I said, guys, we have to have this aeroplane. We must have this aeroplane. Because with the rate our demand is going, we cannot cope with the 200 and 330s or whatever it is. We've got to have a big beast. So we all agreed that it was a great thing to do and bought it, and it was the best thing we ever did because of all the profits that we really gave. That aircraft produced the most. It was a great airplane. We had problems, of course, with the engines, but needless to say. And then, of course, Boeing came along and said, well, we've got a long-range version of this. We said, okay, what can you do with it? They said, well, we can do this. Well, that's not going to cut it. So, Lars, what we need to do is this. Your wing has got to be either bigger or whatever. You've got to have a high, all the others, your thrust is nowhere near it. So you've got to have at least 110, 115K to do the job that we want to do. But the beauty of the aircraft's design, and I don't think Boeing realized it, that they had built something which absolutely hit the sweet spot, not only for that kind of range of the 300, but how easy it was to develop into the 300ER in the beast that we have today. And Al-Bahazi, of course, as you know, Steve was pretty hot on that as well, because he could see what happened. And of course, we naturally then went and bought them and went to GCAS because, funnily enough, nobody would buy them, Max. Nobody would buy them. And I used to say in the media at that stage, here you have an aeroplane that has equal capability as the 747-400 on 2 engines, but actually it's got much greater freight capability than the 400 has by virtue of 8 AMFs forward and 22 LD3s, plus the aft. I said that it's a freighter as well as a passenger, and it'll go over long distances. Well, of course, at that time we were considered the lunatics, the fringe. So I probably did more damage to the ER by doing that. But in the end, that aeroplane, as you know, became, until the 380 was our flagship, and we bought so many of them, as well as the LRs, as well as the LRFs eventually. So again, we were working with them, saying we need more thrust, we need this, we need that. We need to change out the cabin design. We need all sorts of things were going on and on, round and round and round. And at the same time, as you know, our friends in Airbus realized they were missing a trick, because the Sonic Cruiser morphed into the 87, the Dreamliner. And in the great day of 204 in Farnborough, when John Leahy announced that the 330-200 was actually the match of the 787 Dreamliner, and that they didn't really need to do something apart from a few tweaks. And I remember ringing Habib Feki. He was on holiday shortly afterwards in Toulouse. I said, Habib, you are absolutely stark raving mad if you think you're going to take off the Dreamliner with a 330-200 tweaked. And where John has got this from, I have no idea, but I suggest you certainly don't do it. He said, well, you need to start again. You need to come up with a brand new aircraft. That's what Boeing has done. Composite is revolutionizing airframe material. The metallurgical solutions are changing. Propulsion is finally changing, because these guys were getting fat, dumb, and happy and doing nothing in development. And you've got environmental concerns, and you've got all the cabin things. Now you've got to start. So enter the 350, which, when they asked me what would I do with it, I'd say I'd make it a 777-200 lookalike, about that size, 250 in 3 classes, maybe 280 in 2 or whatever. I said, you see the big windows in the 87? You've got to put those in as well. It's got to be a really good one. So they designed it. Of course, we bought the damn things. You know, we bought 70 of them. But as it progressed, and we sat on the early design stages, and I was saying to dear old, what's his name, who ran the program for Zoe, Didier Everard. Didier, believe me, there are certain things you're doing wrong here. And there was Ardal Redder and all our guys and saying, etc. All we can see is, one, you're commercially going the wrong way. Second, your weight burn is going to be so bad that you need to get an eye. Oh no, we're all the. So, and eventually it came in so far over the contracted spec at his MEW that we had to walk away from it. And of course, ever since then, they've been bringing it back to try and get back to at least where we used to be. And that's why more recently we had an interest in it and did the order for the whatever it was last year. The 380, of course, was another one where we got heavily involved in that. You know the story about that. We got very close to getting the Neo done, which I still believe has a place today, post-COVID, in the 2025 plus. Yep. Have they built that? Have they done the... sorry?
And with the new Trent engines, and
yeah,
would you see it stretched a bit as well, or?
Well, there was a stretch, and we were looking at both with the winglets changing, there's a lot of work going on, propulsion gear in some cases. This was going to be an airplane that I think would have been absolutely brilliant. And notwithstanding the problems that Rolls has had with his engines, had the XWB engine as the baseline engine for the Neo 380 being developed to where Rolls told us that it would be, we were talking about a step change in consumption, usual thing about 12, 14% improvement in fuel, and all the other bits and pieces that came with it. And that, of course, well, events overtook us, so that was the end of that. When we got on to the 777-9, this was another initiative we took. We called the Boeing designers in, dear old Lars Anderson again, who I'd worked with in the 90s. I said, Lars, with the 87 now steaming ahead, although we hadn't got to the stage where it was having big problems, we need to replace the 777. And they said, well, by the time we started having meaningful engagement, the 87 had gone pear-shaped, seriously pear-shaped. And they were draining cash just on that whole program, the delays and everything else. But nevertheless, they stuck to it. We kept on pushing them. We said, this is the aeroplane that we need to have. This is what you've got to be able to do. This is what it's got to be able to lift, and the distances, the speeds, etc. And we want a new cabin. And by the way, I insist on big windows. They have to have big windows because everybody else is building. Your 87's got big windows. The 350's has got big windows. You've got to put big windows in this one. And so it went on for about 3 years, working with them, getting them, pushing them, cajoling them, etc., etc. Finally, the thing was born. And as you know, Akbar, in the days that we were talking, he was very keen to be part of it. And he bought 50, and we did that huge order in the 2013, I think it was, air show. So again, once that's got our fingerprints all over it. And
Etihad as well, wasn't it?
Pardon?
Etihad as well, the 3 Gulf carriers did the big thing.
Yeah, Etihad did it. I think they bought about 20. Lufthansa had also bought some. So in the month of the air show in Dubai, they actually sold 350 of the biggest single launch in history. So yeah, and of course by that time we had already developed the new first class suite, fully enclosed cabins, and they are already spec to go into the 9X, and the business class change out, blah 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 blah. But you know, now events have overtaken us. So in answer to the question, did we get involved in a lot of what went on? Yes, I think we did. From the macro to the micro. So whether it be concept aircraft through to what we wanted to do, sizing, etc., right down to design of galleys.
In your position now, as you prepare to sort of take the next stage, not on the front line at Emirates, where do you see the big threat, the big disruptor, potential disruptor in the airline industry from? And I don't just mean things like COVID, because obviously that's something we can't really plan for, but from an airline perspective, or a region perspective, or a strategic perspective, who do you think you'd warn your successors to be wary of?
Well, it's what we should continue to do, which is do what we do so well, which is continue to maintain and support and grow this hub. Now, the reason I say that, it may be fairly trite to say that, is because we've managed to deal with global difficulties of all shapes and sizes since we started. What I'm saying is, whether it be a China-US situation, whether it be the US elections, whether it be an assertive Russia, whether it be, I don't know, a weakening Europe, whether it be whatever it may be, the airline, and our biggest single problem is not competition, believe it or not. Because I'm not blowing our own trumpet, but apart from some people around us who are heavily subsidized and have extremely long state pockets to do what they want to do, we've always managed to hold our own in a hugely competitive environment. When the world has consolidated, IAG, Air France, KLM, etc., and you see the growth of the Chinese carriers, which is not going to stop, I would suggest. As long as you've got a good team of people here who know what they're doing, that is not going to be a problem to you, because you will always be a carrier of choice, providing your product is up where it needs to be, it's innovative, it's sustained, and your price points offer value for money, coupled to the product, coupled to a brand that you continue to spend a lot of money in its international flavor. So the biggest single problem we face as we scale, or whatever we're going to do, is the sort of geopolitical, socioeconomic traumas that the planet will definitely face. This isn't going to end with COVID. There'll be something else coming up. You never know what South American politics is going to do. You never know what European politics, you never know what the global economy is going to do. So you've got to be, it's the strength of the business managers to navigate. If there is a threat, it's that you don't get the right people in to deal with the situation. What they have to realize is that you are a truly international brand. You're not just holding out for that, you are actually an international brand. You're the largest international carrier in the world with some mega lift capabilities, 380s. So never lose sight of that if you want to keep, and so it's important that the people who come after me realize that as long as they stick to their guns, adjust, attune, adapt, innovate, very important. I've spent my life here innovating all the time. Design, change, because the modern consumer, irrespective of you and me flying, is used to that, is expecting that. Whether it be restaurants, look at the way restaurant design has changed, fashion, consumer electronics, iPhones, and all the others. You must be at the cutting edge all the time. Keep it there. Don't be afraid to spend on it. I've never been afraid to spend on it. When we spent $600 million of our own cash transforming, gashing all the in-flight entertainment on our fleet, and put new systems in, $15 million a pop. We did it because we knew that was the thing to do. So I hope that the guys will follow that path of management and not be concerned about, oh, COVID is an ugly one. Even I would admit that. But as these things come at you, just deal with them. As I always used to say, go around them, under them, over them, but never let them stop you. Just keep it going. And believe me, as long as your street cred is as good as it is, as long as you have a modern fleet, you have high punctuality, and you have great service, and you're connecting, you know, I forget what the mathematical permutation of the connectivity of the cities that we face, that we handle, and you do it in the seamless manner in the hub, then it'll all work for you. But if you tamper with any of those, you find yourself with a bit of a problem. But don't worry about the competition. Let them worry about you. And I always used to say, when I stop hearing the noise out there about us, then we all need to worry. So, yeah, I remain optimistic about it. The shareholder is, of course, supportive. The shareholder Dubai needs the airline. It's critical to its existence. So they're going to have to step up in the short term to help us out, which they will do, no doubt. And then we'll get through it. And then we'll start putting cash back onto our balance sheet.
Just, you mentioned COVID. Obviously, we're all fingers crossed for that inoculation program as soon as possible. But how do you think that will change, what we've experienced this year will change the way airlines have to operate in terms of turnarounds, disinfection, more spacious seating? Is there likely to be a more fundamental change, do you think?
No. Max, if we get the vaccine, none of this is going to be required. Nobody wants it. It's not necessary. If you don't get the vaccine, then what you see today is what you see today going forward. Sorry, it's as brutal as that. You can socially space on airplanes, but you know that's an economic catastrophe. Airline business models are not built on 50% seat factors for no segment of the business, so that can't work. Airports are not designed. Airports are compression pressure cookers. That's how they are. One's only got to go to Chicago in the middle of the peak, and there's 50,000 people wandering around. How are you going to do that? How are you going to intersect without destroying the whole business? This vaccine has to be found. You cannot continue this way. People will still travel because they'll have to, not because they want to. And that virtually eliminates 90% of your market. People are having to travel, not because they want to travel. Wanting is those segments that drive all our businesses in the world today. So no, that vaccine must be found. I am 100% confident it will be found. I am 100% confident that the powers that be will understand they cannot limit it to the moneyed West, that the developing world has got to have it in equal proportions. And the pharmaceutical guys have got to realize that they cannot monetize this to the point they always have done in the past, because it's not in their best interest to do that. It would take a child of 3 to realize how their companies would be affected by such daft thinking.
Well, thank you, Tim, for giving it to us straight as ever. I'm sure you'll all agree that this was an insightful narrative of Emirates' first 35 years. It's been fascinating, Tim, to hear the story from your front row seat. So many thanks.